Welcome to Own Your Divine Light show. I'm Janet Miller, and I invite you to meet a soul-level psychologist who is also a licensed clinical psychologist, Dr. Andy Hahn, who received his AB magna cum laude in social studies and psychology from Harvard, his psychology doctorate in clinical psychology from Hahnemann University. He is certified by Helen Palmer to teach the Enneagram. He has been a faculty member in the graduate counseling programs at Lesley University and Northeastern University. His untiring effort to better understand what is going on for people so that he can better help them to live more contented and healthier lives led Dr. Hahn to go out of the confines of traditional Western paradigms that led him on a search for answers that opened him to the worlds of Buddhist and Eastern psychology, mystery training, and so much more. After working with Judith Swack, their collaboration formed the foundation of the work now known as life-centered therapy. In 1997, Dr. Hahn developed the Life-Centered Therapy Training Program for those who want to facilitate and or teach this process. Today, Dr. Hahn has a private practice in Waltham, Mass. Welcome, Dr. Hahn. It's an honor to have you here.
Thanks, Janet. It's an honor to be hearing who I am because I never hear introductions like that, so it's like, oh my God, who is that?
Well, it's you. And
Yes,
you've earned it.
No,
So, Dr. Hahn, you had an amazing experience that started you on your path to your therapy work. Would you mind sharing that with us?
Sure.
That little start. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think, is the one you're referring to the one about the healing of my friend's ankle?
Yes. I mean, you can bring anyone you want. I think that was your initial start, so it was pretty amazing.
I wouldn't say that was my initial start so much as it was a turning point from which it's sort of I couldn't ever experience the world in quite the same way. Before I had that experience, I'd had some very interesting other experiences that were like psi experiences or channeling experiences.
Okay.
So I'd had a lot of strange experiences from the time I was fairly young. I'd say the experience that I know you know a little bit about was I went and visited a friend who was in Encinitas. She had given up her life in a sense for the time being and gone on spiritual retreat at the Self-Realization Fellowship. And I knew I had to get out there to see her. I didn't know why. But it was at the end of actually a period of time for me that had been like a window opening. And I think that was part of the reason I went out there. And so when I went out there, the day before I went out there, my friend, whose name is Roshan, had fallen down and had hurt herself quite badly. Her ankle was very swollen and it was discolored, and she was in terrible pain. And nonetheless, she wanted to take me to the fellowship. So we went in the morning to this really beautiful heart chanting service, and we just did chanting for well over an hour, just heart chanting, and the vibration in that place was amazing. And then she took me to the holy grounds of the fellowship, which, as far as I'm concerned, is like a little bit of heaven on earth, and in the United States that's a good thing to find. And as we were walking there, she stopped at one point and she said, essentially, you're going to have to carry me out of here because I'm in too much pain and my ankle hurts too much. So she sat down on a bench. We were at these two benches, which if people have been to the fellowship, they know them. I had never been there. And she sat at the end of one bench, and I had to sort of circumambulate all these benches because I had this feeling I wanted to be able to put her foot on my ankle. And to do that, I had to walk all the way around these bushes to get to the other end of one of the benches. And when I sat down there, it's very hard to describe what happened because I often say it's like I was filled with a lot of suns. That was sort of the experience of it, because I closed my eyes and it was a fairly sunny day, and suddenly it's like everything became extraordinarily brighter. I guess that would be the best way to describe it. And it was clearly coming from up. Like I knew where the sun was, and it wasn't where the sun was exactly, but it was sort of like in that general direction. And I was just like immersed. I was just flooded with this energy. And so what I said to her, I wanted to put her foot on my ankle anyway so she could rest it. I said to her, Roshan, just put your foot on my ankle, put your ankle on my knee. and I just had the sense I was just supposed to start experiencing this energy flowing through my hands to her ankle. I wasn't touching her. I was just doing that. And that lasted for 5 to 10 seconds. It was a very timeless time. So that's what it seemed like anyway. And when I was done, Roshan said, I didn't know Roshan at the time was an Indian mystic. I just thought she was this very cool woman who was, right before she left, she was the head of all NGOs at the UN. So she was quite an interesting woman in a whole other world. But she says, you know, I can read auras, don't you? And this is 1993, before it was in vogue. And I said, you know, Roshan, I'm a nice Jewish boy from Boston. What do I know from auras? And she says, are you aware that there's light that's coming right through the crown of your head, down into the center of your chest and out your hands to my ankle? And she said also, do you know that you sat in this very funny place? And I said, I realized that. She said, it's called the seat of the healer. People just generally don't sit there. At least that's what she told me. I mean, I know much more about the Self-Realization Fellowship now, but I didn't at the time. And I said, I can't see the energy the way you're describing it, which is coming right down through the crown of my head into the center of my chest and out my hands. But I know what you're saying is true. I mean, I know there's a truth to it. I could sense to it. And then we look down and there's no discoloration. There's no swelling. She gets up and she starts to walk with no pain. And as I said, you know, I make a joke of this. I said, but we're not in Kansas anymore. And it really was like, you know, we're in a different world. Wow. And I've been in other different worlds, but this was a different world than sort of like, you know, having people's life stories come to me or having telepathic experiences with them or things like that. This was a whole different thing. And so at that point in my life, I had, actually, that was way earlier than what I'm telling you, because that was before I started studying all this stuff. So that story must have happened in 1991 because for the next 2 years after that, I really intensively studied everything. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like I knew about healing through touch, but I went and studied it very deeply. And I went and did mystery trainings in deserts with a man named Rujoy, who was an extraordinary teacher. And I met Thich Nhat Hanh, and I did silent meditation retreats with him when he was still not very well known. So I was with him when he was only with like 50 or 60 people. That's incredible. And that was really incredible. It was. And I did regression trainings, although if we talk about it, I don't think we regress people actually. But at the time, I thought we regressed people. I now would say, you can't regress something because it's all happening right now. It just appears like regression. But I did those trainings and all kinds of psychospiritual trainings, and I did that for about 2 years. I studied psychosynthesis. I studied the Enneagram very deeply. I studied a lot of shadow work. I just like went wherever I was sort of led, and then that started me into that. I was trained fairly traditionally, but fairly edgy traditionally, and that took me way off that. Yep. And then I met my colleague at the time, Judith, and Judith and I became colleagues, and we took what she knew, which was energy psychology. She was one of the first students of energy psychology and NLP and some extraordinarily great research Judith did on violence and loss traumas, and some work she had done with a craniosacral therapist who had developed a protocol, a woman named Mary Louise Muller. So that's what Judith sort of brought. And I brought all this stuff about everything you could study in psychology pretty much, because I was in a doctoral program where I got to study family therapy and postmodern systems theory and narrative therapies and everything you can imagine, and psychoanalysis. And then I brought all these Eastern traditions, and I mean, not really, because, you know, I didn't know them well, but I touched a lot of things, and we came together and we developed this work pretty much together. She had done it a little before me, but I had brought things too, and we spent a few years together. And really what we looked at was what were the universal principles, I'd say, this is the way I would say it, for understanding why people suffer. And what are the universal patterns that people could get stuck in that they may not be aware of, that are sort of like fractals or templates that they play out their particular part of, and how can you integrate that with accessing your deepest wisdom. So really we put together what I think are foundational principles that could be applied to anybody who wants to work with suffering and ways of accessing wisdom. And that's where we took off from 25 years ago. And that's my sort of background in this.
Well, yeah, well, you created your life-centered therapy, and it's very soul-centered, and that's what you connect to the whole person. And tell us about that. You talk about what is trauma and its relationship to suffering. I mean, that's where you took off, and this is where your work has led you.
Right. That's the reason most people go to healers. It's not the only reason, is because they're suffering. So what is suffering? Suffering basically is you're feeling pain about pain. You're not just feeling the pain, you're feeling pain about it, which means you have some kind of judgment about it, or some kind of anxiety about it, or some kind of comparison about it, or you just can't be with what is, basically. All right. So why can't people do that? Essentially, it's because there's something that they can't handle and integrate. That's why people suffer. If you can handle and integrate everything, then you could be being crucified, and you wouldn't be like screaming at God saying, "Why hast thou forsaken me?" You'd be saying like, "It's not a big deal. They're just blind. Forgive them. They're blind." But you're not suffering because you're not identified with the body. You're not identified with the one that you call Jesus anymore. You're just universally identified. And in his case, in a very heart-centered way. So I would say if you could handle and integrate everything, you would be a realized being. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Okay? So when people are suffering or trauma, simply means to me that there's something they couldn't handle and integrate. And that's why people, I think, generally go to healers. It's not the only reason, but it's the main reason. And I think healing is only about mastering that which you can't handle and integrate. I think therapy is about that. I think healing's about that. I think everything's about that. And I think there's a universal guiding principle about that, which is when you can't handle or integrate something in that moment, life becomes dense. And the way you would know that denseness is through a body sensation. So like if you could handle and integrate everything, unless you wanted to show me something, if I gave you a massage, I'd be massaging Jell-O because there'd be no dense energy.
Interesting.
You would just be like, there'd be no knots, there'd be no anything, because everything would be in the flow, everything would be clear, and everything would be integrated. And you would just be everything. So what you could say is, whenever there's something you can't integrate, a sensation is born. Just like Janet was born in a moment, a sensation was born in a moment that something could not be handled and integrated. You couldn't just be with it and say yes, right? And then what happens is you stop being in the present moment and you start reliving that over and over and over again. And I think all of our suffering is on one level awful, right? Like, you know, you come in and you have panic attacks, you have chronic pain, or you have major depression, or you have what's called multiple personality disorder, or we call it now dissociative identity disorder, or you have,
bipolar,
immune disease. I don't care what you call it. It's physical, emotional, mental, relational, spiritual, you know. So you have these things, but from my point of view, on a whole other level, they are clues to helping you remember who you truly are. It's like life presents you with a clue. And the simple example of that would be if you're in my office, right, and a car backfires and you have a panic attack, right? I would say your panic attack obviously is something that is on a human level, I have to be with you, and the extreme pain you're in when you're like having that panic attack. But at another level, on a soul level, it's a clue to something that couldn't be handled and integrated. So let's suppose 40 years before, which is an example you may have heard, I'll just make this one up, but I mean, it's 40 years before, you're leading a troop of soldiers and you're not paying enough attention and you walk them into an ambush and bombs go off and you watch them all die. Well, then your problem wouldn't even be the bombs going off, it would be betrayal, right?
Okay.
And so the car backfiring is sort of something that you, without being aware of it, you attract to yourself. It's called the law of attraction. I think we attract what we need in order to heal and grow. You attract to yourself whatever you need in order to remember who you are, which means you could go back to the first situation and in this point, you could master it.
Hmm.
And the interesting thing, of course, is it's living in the here and now, because when that person is having that panic attack, it's in the present moment. So that soldier or that leader of his troops is here right now as a body sensation.
Okay.
So the interesting thing then to say is every body sensation is a being that couldn't handle and integrate something. If it's a discomfort, if it's a nice sensation, it's an aspect of you that is looking to expand. But any contracted experience, which is a discomfort, is simply some being coming to share a story.
Okay.
So I would say if you have a headache, before you take a pill, if I wanted to say one thing to people, I would say, if you have a discomfort, before you take a pill and say, I hate you and I want to get rid of you, you might say, at least I'll bring all my attention to you.
Okay.
And then I will just ask you what you've come to share with me.
Mm.
And if you did nothing else except scan your body and say, I'm going to be with all of who I am, including the parts of me that I really don't like, called headache or whatever,
Right.
and just ask it, what have you come to share? Worlds will open up. And if you have a problem, right, like you're in a bad relationship, for example, and you've been in the same bad relationship over and over and over again, and you really let yourself feel what happens when you drop into your body around whatever the pattern of that bad relationship is, right, you'll feel a discomfort.
Oh, yeah.
And when you bring your attention to that discomfort, worlds will open to you about what's really going on in that relationship that may never have occurred to you, because in all likelihood, it has nothing whatsoever to do in the here and now with your spouse,
Mm.
right?
Yes.
It's
Oh,
just
it's
something
true.
you're bringing. So I'd say that's guiding principles that
That's
no matter
yeah.
I'm sorry, Jenna.
That's okay. No, go ahead. Say what you were going to say.
I
I'm
was going to
listening.
say, I think that's a guiding principle. It doesn't matter what kind of healing work you do.
Mm-hmm.
I think these are universal principles
Yes.
that, why do people come? Because they can't handle something. What is it about? Mastering it. The way to master it is to choose to become it. So
Mm.
then you are the one who's experiencing it, but you're also the one who's hosting it.
Okay.
And if you can know that there are underlying universal patterns like betrayal or neglect or I've been taken over by something, you might be able to do an awful lot of work all at once, because that betrayal that happened to that soldier, it may be that he's having reactions to loud noises, but he may stop taking risks. If he's repressed the whole thing, he may not ever want to go to certain places that remind him of that place and not know why. It might mean that he will be afraid of authority and taking authority, and all those things could be enfolded into that one aspect of being called betrayal, right?
Mm.
So you get to, if you can find out, sometimes you work on the panic attack, but sometimes you can work on what's underlying the panic attack, that the panic attack is just a symptom or a manifestation of, that it may be a doorway into, but you may never have occurred to you what that underlying pattern was. And if you can find a way to find it, right, and where it crystallized, you can go through a lot of healing in a very short period of time, because, if you try to talk about it, it's like you may never get there.
Okay. Because you're really about feeling the sensations in your body and being very present in your body.
Right.
And that's, a lot of people, they're too busy in their life. They're running around. They're not, most of us are not present. Let's put it that way. So when things start happening, they don't think of it. Like you say, they grab the pill. So
what I'd say to you about that is, if you spent just a couple of minutes at the end of every day when you went to bed, and before you went to sleep, just do an inventory of your body. And if you notice a discomfort, just bring your attention there, and you just get actively receptive. Even if you take a minute or two, it'll start to open to you, at least in my experience.
Okay.
Because we're all busy, but what better do we have to do with our lives on one level?
Sure.
And then you might find yourself crying. You say, why am I crying? Because you'll have touched something, and something will have touched you.
Yes.
And then you're more here, which really is the point. More here, more love, more understanding, more freedom.
So, I mean, it sounds simple, but you're bringing it to people now so that they can understand that. Because as I said, most people don't take the time to think about what you're thinking about, what you're giving yourself the time to understand and accept. And so it's a beautiful therapy. So So this is what healing means to you, is this is the way it works for healing.
I would say if someone's coming because they're suffering, that's why I think most people come. I think they do come for a lot of other reasons, but it's not quite the same thing. So they may come because they don't know what they're passionate about, or where their curiosity brings them, or what their destiny is.
Mm-hmm.
And that may be that they've never really looked. They may come for mastery, which may be a whole different thing, because even if you're not blocked, you may still need to master something. They may come because they need to raise their vibration to a higher vibration, to create more energy or more love. They may come because they need to become more mature, which is a different problem than they're traumatized by something. It's sort of like they're limited in a certain way. They may come because they can't open to some perspective and life is asking them to open to it. Or they may even come because they have to learn that they are every perspective, and it's like we have access to everything. And those are different practices than just working on why somebody is suffering. So I think there are other things that people do come in for besides that. But most of the time, most people, they're coming because they know they want something. They don't want to be depressed, or they want to build something and it's not happening, or whatever it is. They're saying yes to a no or yes to a yes, and something's keeping them from having it, and they're suffering about it. And that's why I think that's what I work with individuals or couples or families or circles or organizations or Gaia or the life itself, because we're on one level, we're all just self-organizing systems. It doesn't matter, whether we're life or we're Janet, because Janet is life and life is Janet.
Yeah, well, I want to talk a little more about that, because I know you said you don't believe in regression therapy anymore. And can you explain? And you said there's so many things that other people still think it's important, many healers, but yet you're changing that thinking and you're going outside of that.
I'll tell you why I'm changing the thinking, because I don't think we're actually regressing somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're actually talking with someone who's here, or some being that's here right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that changes the whole ball game. Like, let's say you had some kind of ritual abuse when you were 2 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most therapists would say, even if they had a body-centered therapy, they'd say you have to do that in a very titrated way. You have to build a relationship of trust. You have to take them into it slowly. Then you have to take them out of it. You have to mediate it, right? Yeah. Why? Because they think they're bringing you back to age 2. They think they're regressing you.
Okay.
Now, what I'm going to say, which makes, from my point of view, all the difference in the world, is I'm not regressing Janet. But let's say 2-year-old Janet is here.
Mm-hmm.
If Janet, who's sitting here right now, can choose to become 2-year-old Janet, who's experiencing the ritual abuse, if there's any observing ego whatsoever, Janet now is going to become 2 people simultaneously.
Yes.
Janet is going to be here hosting and witnessing.
Yep.
And that's who she's going to be identified with. And she's going to choose to bring her attention to someone who's here, who's going to be called 2-year-old Janet, who is watching murders or being raped or being forced to hurt somebody, right? But I'm not here regressing Janet to being 2. Okay. I'm here saying to the witness, choose to be the one who's traumatized while you're holding them.
Okay.
And at that point, you might start writhing on the floor, but there'll be a part of you that's aware of the you that's writhing on the floor. You won't become that you anymore if you have any observing ego whatsoever. And I've been doing this now for 25 years, and I've worked with people who have had the most amazing stories of trauma.
Yes, yes.
And I will find that things that I've been told are impossible, it's just not my experience. That doesn't make it true. But if you have somebody who, I could start telling you some very interesting stories of ritual abuse.
We'd love to hear some. if you want to share it. But I mean, do you want to get whatever you feel is, important for people to know about what your work?
Well, I mean, in terms of this, why I say that is I've had a couple of, the problem with doing this is these seem like big miracle stories. Most of the stories are little miracle stories. It's like you do this healing and you get a small miracle, but you don't get something like, somebody who's hospitalized 2 times a year for before she sees you, and then has one session and never goes up in a psychiatric hospital again. I mean, people hear that story, they say, yeah, right. And not all stories are like that. I mean, they are, sort of like the exceptions, because if you happen to find a story that many things crystallized under, or a story that is so profound that it rips apart your container, and you can transform that story, you can have something that looks like it's a miracle from the Bible. But most people, they're not coming because they've had ritual abuse, or because they, have had an energy take them over when they were 8 years old after they've been raped and incested. Most people are coming for other reasons, because somebody screamed at them and they couldn't handle it,
right.
or
something common.
I mean, whatever, so it's like you get these little things where, you go back and you say, oh my God, and they're simple things, and when I first started this work, I remember, because I was first starting it, I don't remember a lot of sessions, because sessions for me are like dreams.
Sure.
I had, I'll just tell you the story, because it's a sort of big little miracle, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And it's here right now for me. So I saw this man, he and his wife came in because he had, without intending to, I mean, it was not premeditated, he had hit her.
Oh,
hard.
Oh, wow.
And he was shocked by it, and she was shocked by it. It was out of the realm of what they were used to, and they were both very scared, because nothing like that had ever had. They had fought, but they had never had any kind of physical violence.
Right.
And so there are things you do when that comes up, which I'm not going to talk about.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
But so we found out, for example, in that case, that what had happened is that he had made a choice when he was a little boy. And I'll tell you the story of what happened, and I'll tell you what happened to him when he was a little boy. I mean, because this is like, and this was right when I was starting this work. I mean, this is 25 years ago.
Okay.
Actually, more than that. Yeah. Anyway, so what had happened is he was a big burly electrician, and his wife was, a very powerful woman also. And they had their first child. You had just told me, you were having your first grandchild. Well, they had their first child, and right before they had the child, he had had an accident at work, and he was disabled.
Oh.
And so he had to, his wife had to go and work. They were a quite traditional couple, and there's stories about that were her stories. But anyway, she had to go and work, and he had to take care of the baby. Now, he was not used to taking care of babies. Sure. It was not like but life is life. So this baby he's taking care of this baby one day, and she walks in, and he's trying to diaper the baby and not doing a very good job. And she's kind of joking with him and saying, oh, that's a stupid way to do this, instead of kind of like that.
Yeah.
And he hauled off and slugged her.
Whoop.
Right?
Yep.
And so you say, well, what the heck was that about?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we find out, in a way that I, will describe later if we want to go there, that it was a story from this lifetime, that none of him was here, that he had made, something had happened to him when he was 11.
Okay.
I could find that out. And what we found out, when I had him drop into the feeling of stupid, right?
Okay.
He felt it very strongly, and he dropped back in, and he starts to cry.
Oh.
Now, his wife had never seen this man cry. They'd been married for 11 years. I remember this. Never once. I mean, that was even more stunning to her than the fact that he went off and hauled off and slugged her, right? He's crying there, and he's saying, I'm 11. I can remember this. I'm getting goosebumps. This is 1993, and it's 2019 now. So you see, the things are in the present still.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
His father's a laborer. He's trying to help his father. He has to shovel some gravel. He has this enormous gravel, enormous shovel that he can't do a very good job with. And his father, I found out, but his father is with a group of friends, and he's there trying to do it, and he's doing a terrible job of doing this. Mm. He overhears his father say, look at my stupid kid. He can't even, okay.
Aww.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he's crying and crying and crying and crying and crying. And so what I can say to his wife is, in this part of it, because we take turns, I said, he needs something different. There's several ways you can make something different. You can change your own behavior. You can have someone else change their behavior. But if you're with a couple, one thing you can do is, as long as you and get them out of the fact that one's a child and one's acting as a parent, which is fairly easy to disenroll. You can have her act as the father and find out what he needed to hear. And all he needed to hear was, I see how hard you're trying, and I know this isn't easy for you. And he's telling her all this through tears, and she feeds it back to him sort of like left eye to left eye. And he breaks down crying, and like she hugs him, and like she's looking at me like, she's mostly looking at him, but this is like stunning to her.
Sure.
They had other things to work on, but that was
a groundbreaker. Yeah, that's amazing.
And the way you find it is you find the body sensation around stupid, and you know that something happened at 11, and you just drop in, and he's found it, and he hadn't thought about that story. He even remembered it existed.
Isn't that
until he became the body sensation. Now he's the 11-year-old while witnessing it. And so
it's amazing how the smallest things impact us in such a big way that we don't even realize that we're still living it. Like you're saying, we're still living this, and it's affecting us in so many ways we can't even imagine. So that's why your work is so profound, and that it's bringing out this simplicity of this is where you need to go, yet it's not as simple as you think, because we don't realize we can go there. But you're bringing it now that we can go there.
On the one hand, it's very simple.
Right.
Like somebody could hear this podcast and they could start doing it for themselves.
Okay.
They could start doing it with their loved ones just from hearing this.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we originally called this guided self-healing.
Okay.
Guided by life. Like, and what is your role? Your role is to tune into something and to be a reporter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And life will then reveal to you what you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing then you don't know is three things, sort of. You don't know if there's a problem that isn't the problem you think is the problem, right? Like the betrayal story.
Yes.
But this guy still would have gone very far if all he knew was he had a reaction to loud noises.
Okay. Yep.
Right. But if I can find its betrayal, it might get a little more elegant. Right.
Yes. Yes.
He doesn't know where the thing crystallized. So, if you don't open to every possibility,
okay,
you may be limited. So I would say, however you make sense of it, you have to open to everything.
All right. Okay.
And you have to open to what that being who's can't handle something, if they need something other than just to share their story with the one who's witnessing and hosting. Sometimes they'll say they need something else, right? They might need EMDR or EFT, or they might need to make amends, or they might need to pray, or they might need to scream, or they might do anything. And I can find that out too. So what you can't do just from watching this podcast is you can't do it in the most elegant way.
Sure.
But you could do it right now. And if you really tuned into your body, like if you were anxious or judgmental or comparative about anything, you could just say, what's happening in my body? You could bring your attention there and something will come to you.
Oh,
and
definitely.
I can pretty much guarantee you that one of two things will happen. Either the problem will become less, or your relationship to it will change to a degree that you won't be as anxious or as judgmental or as comparative as you were before.
Okay.
Because that's the guarantee. If you take it to the end, and the end may not end before you die, just so we'll know, because if you think that there is such a thing called reincarnation, this is just like, one year in the life of a soul, and the souls can go on for many, many years. Just like, years to us in terms of ego are sort of like lifetimes to souls. So, from their point of view, it's like it's one more. I mean, we're just trying to evolve. But how does life evolve? It evolves through us, because every time we say, I can just be with something without needing to understand it, because that's a compulsion, or touching it, or comparing it, or analyzing it, but just being with it, dense energy, matter, turns back into its pure form, which is energy. And then there's more life, and there's more love. So if life is going to evolve, it does it through us.
Right. I know I was, you were explaining about consciousness, and you had the three facets of the mind. I thought that was very interesting. The conscious, the unconscious, and the spirit. You were talking about that, and how God is is everything, but there are some things that God cannot do. I thought that was a fascinating, I don't know if you want to go there, but where do you,
I'm happy to go there. I mean, because there's different aspects of the divine, right? There's different aspects of God. So there's the Jewish God we call Yahweh. There's a Christian God we call Christ. And I actually think that that's not the same thing as source, right?
right. Mm-hmm.
Because, but let's start by talking about source. Let's say we have this idea of spirituality, right? And spirituality basically says that everything is light.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, if you want to create more love, as Jesus says, when two or more are gathered, there can be more love.
Mm-hmm.
So if life wants to create the possibility for more love, and there's only one thing, there's a problem, right?
Okay.
That's why we can say, there's these two words for the divine. It's called omniscient, right? The divine knows everything, and omnipotent, which is the belly. There's the mind and the belly, right? Right. But if you want to create soul, that says life knows everything. Life is all powerful. But if life wants to be all loving, there is no actual word for all loving. There's omnipotent and there's omniscient, but there isn't. So we have to say the English word for all loving because it's not there in the Latin, right? Well, it's not in the Latin for sure. So how does life create more love? It has to create something to love. Right? And that something by definition, God then has to, you could say the divine has to do five things, right? What does God do? It's the five faces of God. It's in many mystical traditions. God creates, right? Something that's limited. God has to sustain it, right? God destroys it, right? I mean, that's why we die. It's like we could talk about what happened in the Garden of Eden. But God destroys, God mystifies, and God reveals, right? The five elements. And what is our work? Our work is to realize, which is an awareness that who we are is everything. Then what you have is self-aware unity. And then we're two and one at the same time. So if we want to create more love, we have to, by definition, if we're the divine, I would assume you have to create something that is limited, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And separate and ignorant, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And then there are three things. I think that's the Trinity. If you want to talk about the traumatized aspect of the Trinity,
Sure.
right? It's called forgetting,
Okay.
it's called limited, and it's called separate. That's the Trinity in its traumatized form. I don't know if that's true because that just occurred to me. So it may or may not be true, but I think it is. So, but what is our work is to say, I can be in relationship with you, but what happens if I also know that I am you and I'm in relationship?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Then all I could do would be to be fully engaged with you, fully open-hearted and fully open-minded, because you're just me is a variation. And I think that's what the universe, that's what life is. And like I said, there are two metaphors that really speak to me about this, one being biological and one being energetic. The biological metaphor is the metaphor of cells and bodies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like we have like 3 trillion cells. So if you could see, like I'm here and here, right? They're two cells. Well, they'd at least know they're part of the same universe. If one was like this one and one was like this one, they'd say, oh my God, there was like this space in between us, and we think this is a whole different world we didn't even know about until we got very, very powerful telescopes, right?
Okay.
But really, we would know they're part of the same whole.
Mm-hmm.
And they are the whole, because the interesting thing about cells is you could take all 3 trillion of them in this dimension,
right,
and you could study all of them, and people who know way more than me have told me you can't ever find 2 that are the same.
Mm.
But on the other hand, they have to be exactly the same, because the template, the blueprint, you could take one of them, and if you had enough information, you could clone the whole body, right?
It's incredible, yes.
So it's very interesting. That's another trinity, to say, I'm in relationship with all of life.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that I'm in relationship with that seems limited is all life, and I myself am all life right in this little cell.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I had to, I could recreate my whole universe if I knew how to do it. If
Mm-hmm.
I could be the template and not the particular, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And
Wow.
that's why I think that everything is happening simultaneously. You can know it just from the idea of cloning. Because if that
Right.
were the case, how could you theoretically take one cell, and if you had enough information, you could simultaneously and spontaneously create the universe? It's not that the information travels, it's there right now.
Wow.
That's
Yeah.
why you can know something. How can you know something that you can't have any access to? Because when you touch into the template holographically, it's just a version of you.
Mm. Yeah.
Everything that has ever happened, is happening, and potentially can happen is here right now. And that's why I'd say the other metaphor is holographic. If you take a universe, which is a hologram, and you break it into an infinite number of pieces, each of the pieces will be different shapes,
Mm-hmm.
theoretically,
Right.
if you're in this dimension. But each one holds the whole universe. That's what a hologram is. So you break a hologram into a lot of pieces. You don't have a lot of little pieces. You have a lot of different shapes, right? The surface is different, but underneath, we're all one. Everything is there in that one little piece, right? So the mystery, Blake, the grain of sand holds the universe in the grain of sand, and the grain of sand is the universe. It's both.
Mm.
And that's who we are.
Yeah.
And when we realize that, that's what I think people come to healing for, because when you
Right.
realize that, you're
Yeah.
free.
Yes.
But then you have to realize, if you're, Christ, you are Pontius Pilate or whatever. You
Okay.
are the person who's like putting the nails into you,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So how can you hate them? You are them. But
Wow.
most of us aren't really there, so we're not so happy when they're like going bang, 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 right?
Right. Right.
We forget who we are. So
Yes.
what is life about? It's about remembering.
Mm.
And everything you suffer about is an invitation to remembering who you truly are, until you finally realize that who you are is everything. And
Mm.
if you could find the things that you're most afraid to experience about yourself, and you could experience them, you would just feel about them the same way you feel about everything else.
Mm. Yes.
You'd say, I'm the worst person in the history of the world, and I'm also wearing a beautiful pink frock. And you'd say it with as much charge. At which point, and believe me, I am not there. I maybe caught a little glimpse of it in that moment that I was telling you about, in the one moment after that, where I
Yeah.
really had a
Yeah.
sense of like not very much personal Andy. But I want you to know, most of the time, it's easy.
Yes.
It's easy to say, and it's not easy. I mean, as my colleague and the person I do this with says, it's like, it's easy to say, but it's like climbing Mount Everest. And the higher up you go, the less oxygen there is, and the steeper it gets. And like, so that part of it is not like a miracle, where somebody who was hospitalized many, many times doesn't go back to the hospital because something took her over and we released this energy that took her over.
Mm.
That one is like, that's the one when you go to bed at night and you say, what is here that I'm really afraid to experience? And I'm going to just be it.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So our work here is, I know you talked about self-aware, to be a self-aware divinity. So your work makes us be very self-aware that we're part of everything, and that this is how you created your work, really. I mean, this is where it all comes from.
Well, self-aware, but it's not just about awareness, because it's also, I mean, the problem with just talking about awareness is people then talk about consciousness, and then they think consciousness, but then they think hierarchically.
Oh,
So as
okay.
long as they know that consciousness includes bodyfulness and heartfulness, we're in
Okay.
good shape.
A
But
full,
a lot of people say like, oh, they think of it, they really talk about consciousness as everything, but they mean it as mind.
yes, that's
And then they think mind has dominion over the body, and then what they call consciousness is not what I would call consciousness. So,
so when you say that, you're saying self-awareness of your body, your mind, your soul, the whole package, the whole.
but also
The whole
it's self-awareness, but it's also fully experiencing something, right? So it's both
okay.
at
Yeah.
once. I mean, if I'm a Sufi dancer and I'm spinning, that may be opening my heart in a way that there's an awareness to it, but it's also something that just is about more love as opposed to more awareness. So there's these three
Mhm.
things that are happening, and they all are interacting with each other. So sometimes if I'm touched by a poem, it touches
Mhm.
this, but it may also deepen my awareness. It may deepen my compassion. It may deepen my engagement. So if, as long as we know when we're talking about consciousness, we're talking about more understanding and awareness, but also more love and compassion and more engagement and presence, then we're fine to talk about consciousness, because then we don't think we have dominion. Then we say, I am the tree, right? I am the body.
Okay.
So as long as we're aware of that, then we can talk about consciousness only.
Right, right. So we are part of all. Like you said, we're all one, and then we're everything. We're plants, we're animals, we're trees, we're the earth, because we are the earth. Our cells are part of the earth. It's all the same material. It's amazing. It's amazing. So, well, thank you. I mean, this is just, whew, it's a lot of information, and I know it's going to be interesting for people to take this in, because it's powerful, and it's a lot, and to me, it's really beautiful. It's beautiful work that you're doing.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. And if people want to know more, they can go to our website. We're lifecenteredtherapy.com, and if they ever want to study with us, it will be a pleasure. And
Yes.
hopefully, we'll have a chance to meet live, because we're not so far away. Because
Oh,
in
exactly.
digital
Exactly. Oh, I
reality,
would love to. I would. And I would like to ask you, do you have any message for people in 2019 that you think they need to know about, be aware of? What would you say for this year? What's something that people need to know?
I'd say what we need to know most is that it's important to become life-centric and not egocentric, and to
Hmm.
know that we're here in service. And when we remember that, we can't always be right. We don't know what we're doing. We make our commitments, right? Because who are we to say who is and who isn't? You
Hmm.
know, we
True.
don't have that much perspective. But having said that, we have to open to more understanding and more love, and being engaged in the world in a way that we're making some kind of contribution, whatever that contribution is. I mean, whether you're a monk in a cave saying I'm creating more of it there, or if you're, doing something on, in your local community, or if you're just caring for a parent, or if you work on something like child slavery, but like that there's some sense that we're here for something more than just our egocentric self. I think that's the most important message. I'd say the second most important message right now in this country is really about gender. We're trying to learn something about gender,
Yeah.
and we're trying to learn how to really respect each other. And I think that's been an ongoing um, journey.
Hmm.
And we're trying to learn how to do that while all of the identities that we ever had about it are being stripped away. And I think, what I'd also say about that is, how much can we get beyond any sense of identity?
Mm.
So I think there's something about identity politics, because I think sometimes that's really important, but sometimes it's like, identities are getting stripped away from us. And can we open to larger ways of understanding than I am this and you are that,
Right.
right?
That's
Well, we also have to honor, we all bring something and it's all different. And if we can do that holding of these two things simultaneously, about, you know, difference and honoring difference, but also honoring unity at the same time,
yes.
that would
Because
be,
you
I
are
guess,
me.
what I'd say.
Because you are me and I am you.
Right. And we're different.
And
And
we are unique in our individuality, yes. But we are all the same in the core yeah.
so
All
this
right.
is a total pleasure talking with you, Janet.
Thank you. And I just want to ask, I know you have a generous gift to offer. So would you like to tell us a little about your gift?
Yeah, we're giving $250 off of our first weekend of our training.
Hmm.
And we do our first weekend in different ways, but it's really quite a substantial part of what our first weekend is. So um, I feel very funny, but I don't know how people can, whether they go to our website for the gift or go to you. Maybe you can.
No, I'll put the URL on this link to your show, and they'll be able to click on that after the show is finished today, and connect with that. And we will, we'll let you know if we get anything, and you should be, well, you'll know what's going on. We will
Beautiful.
connect you with who the person is. Absolutely. So
Wonderful.
I do want to thank you so much, Dr. Hahn. And also our audience, I'd love you to email us and tell us if you have any aha moments with this talk. And tell us what you like, any comments at all. I know Dr. Hahn would like to hear. If you need to contact Dr. Hahn and get more information about his life-centered therapy, he has given you his lifecenteredtherapy.com.
.com 781-891-7448, and they can call the Institute too. And you know, right now we don't do online trainings. That's the next thing we're going to do. So we have to go to you, or you have to come to us. But soon we'll.
Well, personal is sometimes the best.
Well,
Sometimes.
we'll always be personal, but at
Well,
least.
of course, but face to face, you know, we're losing some of that. So maybe that's important. That's why it's not. You haven't gone the other way yet.
Well, hopefully, what we'll be able to do is do these lectures that people can study them online, so I don't have to keep saying the same thing over and over and over
Right.
again.
Well, they're profound. They are profound. They really are. So I want to thank you so much, Dr. Hahn, for being the blazing seeker of new paradigms of soul healing, and for owning your divine light and creating a prototype of healing to support people and to help them unlock their passions and ignite their authenticity and to finally create the lives they love. Thank you again.
Thank you too, Janet, because you're a gift.
Oh, thank you. And I thank you very much for that. And I'm Janet Miller, and I will catch you all on the next episode.